things looked like a mess. Not the typical chaos that accompanied her life, but a new and improved version of her usual bombastic living style. The military had trained her well, instilling a rigorous sense of organization and cleanliness that had served her for a time. However, the allure of rebellion tugged at her, enticing her to embrace a certain level of disarray. It was almost a conscious decision, a little act of defiance against the structure that had once shaped her life. Who was going to reprimand her? What consequence was there to leaving things as they lay? None. And she couldn't deny she enjoyed that thought. Still, despite the clutter that surrounded her, a few important items remained well tended. Those were the things that held significance beyond the chaos. She navigated carefully over the strewn pile of clothing, hardly acknowledging its existence, and made her way to the opposite corner of the room where her small lockbox resided. This box had become a sanctuary of sorts, a keeper of her most cherished possessions. With one hand, she picked it up, while her other hand deftly righted her overturned bed, a makeshift throne of sorts in the mess of her room. Settling down with the box in her lap, she took a deep breath, preparing to open it with a silent prayer that nothing inside had broken. To her relief, everything appeared to be intact. The contents were jumbled, but chaos was a familiar friend. Most importantly, the glass bottle of Ricilla, her prized possession, was still whole, unshattered, and undamaged. Relief washed over her like a cool breeze on a hot day. With gentle care, she withdrew the handgun and knife first, setting them aside with a sense of reverence. Then came the Ricilla bottle, and she inspected it closely, ensuring that it hadn't suffered even the slightest scratch. In that moment, she paused, contemplating whether to place the bottle on the cot beside her or return it to the box. After a moment's hesitation, she decided to savor the experience. With a satisfying pop, she removed the cork and brought the bottle to her nose. She wouldn't drink it, at least not yet, but the distinct, smoky aroma enveloped her senses. She closed her eyes, allowing the rich scent to linger, a heavy warmth settling at the back of her nose. After a moment of indulgence, she replaced the cork and set the bottle down, a small smile gracing her lips, asterisk asterisk. Next, she fished out a tarnished coin from the box. It was a relic of sorts, worn by time and use, bearing a simple design with a three-headed dog engraved on both faces. Each head had a different expression. The center head bared its teeth, the left growled, and the right displayed a snarl, its fang glinting in the dim light. The coin bore the scars of age, small chips around the edges and heavy tarnish, except for two polished spots where it had been rubbed smooth by years of worry and contemplation. With a gentle flip, she rolled the coin in her palm before placing it beside the gun and knife, a small but significant addition to her collection. Finally, she retrieved her trusty pencils and a leather-bound pad of paper. She felt a twinge of anxiety, checking to ensure that nothing was out of place. Flipping open the pad, she was relieved to find that even the old photograph tucked into the inside cover had remained undisturbed. It was a physical photo, a rarity in this digital age. One Jane had insisted they all get printed during a shore leave at an antique shop. They had gathered, laughing and teasing each other as they posed in front of the bulky machine that had churned out their pictures. Now, as she stared at the familiar faces captured in that moment, nostalgia washed over her. Pen looked over the photograph, a mix of joy and melancholy flooding her heart. Each face told a story, a memory etched in time, and she felt a pang of longing for those carefree days. But she knew better than to dwell. With a sigh, she carefully replaced the photograph, closing the pad with a decisive snap. She checked the pencils for damage, finding none before returning everything to the box. With practiced hands, she organized her items, ensuring each found its rightful place. Satisfied, she closed the lockbox and slid it under her bed, a secret guardian of her cherished memories. Looking around at the rest of the mess, she decided it could wait. The world outside was calling to her, and she felt an irresistible pull toward it. Stepping outside, she embraced the warm air, taking in the peaceful atmosphere around her. The town was abuzz with activity, the people bustling about with a sense of purpose and joy. She noticed the smiles exchanged between neighbors, the waves of hello as they passed. It was a delightful contrast to the chaos of her room, a reminder that life thrived outside her four walls. As she wandered through the streets, she admired the small stands being set up, long wooden benches being carried to the center of town, and vibrant ribbons being strung overhead, dancing lightly in the breeze. The preparations for the evening festivities were in full swing, and the air was rich with the savory aroma of something delicious being cooked. The scent wafted through the streets, enticing her senses and drawing her closer to its source. Not cooking, smoking, the woman corrected, her enthusiasm bubbling over. We've got some standard briskets and ribs, a pork shoulder, a couple of pork butts, and some chicken breasts, too. Oh, and in this little guy, I've got some salmon going. But alas, none of this will be ready until later tonight. The worst part of this process is the waiting, she said with a hearty laugh. Pen feigned despair. Ugh, I guess I'll just have to come back later tonight then. Sure thing, honey. Check out everyone's stuff. I get competitive, but we don't have any bad food around here, no matter who you go to. I'll make sure to bring my appetite. Pen replied, her excitement growing. Oh, we're more than a match for someone like you, darlin', the woman teased, her competitive spirit shining through. Their eyes met, and for a moment, they shared a grin, the promise of good food and camaraderie hanging in the air. Just then, the man tending the grill spoke up. He was as old as the woman, completely bald but boasting a magnificent salt and pepper beard that seemed to have its own personality. His voice was gravelly, as if he had spent years working under the sun. If you're looking to work up an appetite, I know folks are still hauling stuff around if you want to help, he said, nodding toward a group of townsfolk. Pen's eyes sparkled with eagerness. Might as well. Point the way. He motioned her over to another duo who had just put down a long bench, and Pen fell in step behind them, joining in the preparations for the night ahead. Meanwhile, Deeg sat near the mayor, observing as his crew mingled with the townsfolk. Some of his crew had chosen to remain aboard the ship, hesitant or distrustful, but the majority had embraced this opportunity for interaction. Deed couldn't help but smile at the scene before him, witnessing his crew members laughing and chatting with the humans. It was a heartening sight, a beautiful testament to the bonds being forged amidst the backdrop of their shared experiences. Perhaps it was foolish of him to cling to the stories he had heard, to let them cloud his judgment. They had painted a picture of humans as brutish and unyielding, but here he saw a different side, one filled with warmth and kindness. He chuckled softly to himself at the irony of it all, reveling in the notion of a simple misunderstanding leading to profound revelations. "Was that a laugh?" the mayor asked, glancing over at him as she handed off a piece of paper to a young man nearby. Deed turned his gaze to her, nodding. "Yes, it was. Just reflecting on the beauty of the moment." "Care to share what's so amusing?" she inquired, a curious glint in her eyes. "It's just funny to see your people like this," he replied, gesturing toward the bustling crowd. "Doing everyday things. It's so different from the stories I've heard." The mayor raised an eyebrow, her expression contemplative. "Everyday things?" she echoed, her interest piqued. "Indeed. The stories we hear often cast you in a different light, one of warships and might." The mayor smiled softly, a knowing look in her eyes. "Well, warships do send a very specific message, don't they?" "They certainly do," Deed agreed, feeling a twinge of guilt for the preconceived notions he had harbored. "If it were up to me,